joint public meeting. So welcome everybody. Welcome to TransLink headquarters here for this, which is the third joint meeting of the TransLink Board and Mayor's Council. I'll call this meeting to order, and just for the sake of summarizing why we're here, these joint meetings of the Board, TransLink Board and Mayor's Council are held from time to time to enable both bodies to make both the decision-making bodies of TransLink that have overlapping responsibilities to have discussions on some of our key issues and challenges. And as we move along through the next phase of the 10-year plan, there are more of these meetings to come to work through the details. So I'll just note for those in the audience that since the Act that governs TransLink does not provide for a formal mechanism and with joint decision-making, these joint meetings will be legally constituted as separate meetings of the TransLink Board and Mayor's Council by their respective rules of procedure. So in other words, we adapt and we make do with our imperfect government legislation, but our focus is to get the work done, to talk collectively through the issues as they arise. And we are living in interesting political times with a really important 10-year plan to deliver for the region. So we are adapting and sitting together as two decision-making bodies, but we make adjustments as we go here, and we make decisions. There are obviously opportunities for members sitting around the table here to propose motions that they can be considered by these two boards separately. So if there's a motion from a member of the Mayor's Council, then I can chair what ensues from there, and Lorraine Cunningham here, the chair of the TransLink Board, can do that if there's a motion arising from the board here. So that's just a preamble in terms of how we run these joint meetings. We do not have any substantive motions on the agenda for today in this public meeting, but just wanted to clarify that. And we in terms of convening these meetings, the decision to convene them is made collectively by Lorraine and I as the chairs of these two bodies. So today we have a number of updates to consider. We have an agenda in front of us that was distributed on May 19th. The missing reports for item 2 were added on May the 23rd, so the materials are all available on the TransLink website. We need a mover and seconder for the agenda as circulated. Moved and seconded. So Larry and seconded by Linda. And all those in favor of adopting the agenda? Any opposed? That carries. Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is a report of the Joint Committee of the Board and TransLink that is overseeing the development of the next phase of the 10-year vision. This is the Funding Strategy Committee, as we call it, the 10-year Investment Plan Committee on the board side. And that's chaired by Mayor Cote and by Lorraine Cunningham on the board side. And maybe before we move into the staff report from Jeff Cross, if there are any comments that Mayor Cote or Lorraine you would like to make?
Okay, so happy to make some comments. We've had one joint funding strategy and investment plan committee meeting that occurred after the provincial election. It was our anticipation that there would be a significant amount of clarity as to what the next provincial government was going to be at that point, and unfortunately, as we all are aware, that isn't necessarily the case. But we do find ourselves in a unique position with a minority government here following the provincial election. The committee spent a lot of time talking about the dynamics and how both TransLink and the Mayor's Council are going to be interacting with the next provincial government, and utilizing this as an opportunity to reaffirm many of the requests and requirements that we were looking for, and issues we were highlighting during the provincial campaign with our Cure Congestion campaign. I think we recognize there's probably a short window of opportunity to try and be proactive and engage with the next provincial government, no matter what that ends up looking like in terms of form. I think the fact that we have a minority government means that we're most likely going to have a government that is going to be more reactive and be able to respond and want to work with the Metro Vancouver mayors and the TransLink board. I think if you look at the results of the last provincial election, Metro Vancouver was a significant factor in this provincial election. And although Courtney Comox got the lion's share of attention, the reality is most of the very close ridings in this provincial election were all in Metro Vancouver. And to me, I think that really highlights that the region has so many important issues, with transportation being one of them, that that I think we have an opportunity to engage with all of the parties, all three of the parties in the next provincial government. Namely, I think we can really kind of break down our three major things that we need to work on in the short term. The first is to get finalization on the development cost charges to allow us to fully take care of phase one of the 10-year transportation plan that we approved last year. That plan is already underway, and we're starting to see transit improvements across the region, but it was contingent on a small development cost charge being applied by 2019, and we need to make sure by the fall of this year that we are getting commitments. A bigger if is the Patella Bridge. I think we've all been trying to highlight the condition of that bridge and the need to make some final decisions about the replacement of that bridge. And no matter how you want to slice it, the provincial government is going to have to play a major role in moving that project forward. And we don't have years to debate or to delay that discussion. This is probably one of the most urgent issues that's going to be facing the next provincial government. And the third and final component is really sitting down with TransLink and the Mayor's Council about dealing with the funding gap for phase two. During the campaign, there was a discussion about renewing the referendum, and I think the Mayor's Council at least has been very clear that we don't have an interest in going down that road again, but we are open and looking forward to having discussions with the next provincial government about ultimately solving that regional funding gap and allowing us to move forward with the major projects in phase two of the 10-year plan. So I think, just in summation, the committee, I think, really emphasized that we need to make sure that all three of the political parties can be champions of the mayor's 10-year plan, and I think we're going to have a significant opportunity over the next several months to engage with the parties to have that be one of the items that they take on in this probably shorter than normal term of a government.
Okay, thanks very much, Mayor Cote. Thanks for your leadership chairing that committee, and along with Lorraine, thanks to you both. And we are going to go to Jeff Cross, who has been leading the charge as the TransLink VP of Planning, and Mike Buda, who is our Executive Director for the Mayor's Council. In terms of, we have three reports here: the Phase 2 plan of the 10-year vision, overview and timeline, then there's a Patella Bridge replacement project, and then next steps on regional funding. And I'm going to suggest that we just run through those three because they're all interconnected, and then we can have questions from the joint committee here, joint board here, to our staff. So Jeff, take it away from here.
Thanks, Chair, Board, and Mayors. So this should be relatively familiar to you by now. This is the dashboard, our kind of accountability dashboard on how we are both implementing and planning on implementing the Mayor's 10-year vision. So the categories are all listed on the left, and the overall plan is the first column that was developed in 2014 and endorsed by the board, as well as the blueprint. The Phase 1 plan is well underway now, so that's the second column. We have been making improvements to bus service in April. We are planning for more in June. Very significant increase in September as schools, post-secondary institutions go back into school into the fall semester. We'll see very significant improvements across the region, as well as new service areas, both in northeast sector and south of Fraser, where we're getting service to areas that currently don't have it. So we'll be coming forward with updates on that as we get closer, and we've been consulting with the public on those elements as well. So we're very pleased to have been on time and been able to deliver everything that we had hoped for in Phase 1 so far. The ridership growth has been there, both demographically speaking, and they've been consuming the new services as we've been able to roll them out. So that's very promising, and reinforces that increasing the supply and starting to catch up is really important. We are also working with all the municipalities right now on the major road network funding that we've now increased over the course of the next 3 years. Those projects have been put forward by the municipalities. Those are all cost share programs. Same is true for the new walking program, Walking to Transit. So we're very excited about that, and the cycling program as well. There's been more than enough applications for the amount of funding that's available this year. We've been running workshops on that. So all elements of the vision are now in play. So turning to that now after the election and the federal commitment of $2.2 billion in public transit infrastructure funds to the region, how does that set us up for phase 2? That's what you see in the middle column. This has been the work that we've been undertaking with the Funding Strategy Committee, starting to assume that years 4 and 5 of the Mayor's vision would be the basis by which we roll out the next plan, and need to find the funding accordingly for that. So there'd be probably 2 years of bus service. We're working on exactly what that would be. I think the template that we followed in phase 1, whereby we develop a very specific service plan, what it looks like in terms of new service areas, improvements to existing service, improvements to the rail, and we're able to map that out and bring that before you for trade-offs. That's what we will be doing in this process, and engaging municipal partners and the public as well. That will follow as well for the MRN, cycling and walking. We'd be looking at extending that program for years 4 and 5. Then we get into the major chunks. So in phase 1, we did a lot of pre-work for the major projects, for Patello, for Broadway extension of Millennium Line, and for stage 1 of South of Fraser Rapid Transit, so Surrey, Newton, Guildford. Now we would be looking at getting construction funded in that plan. So that would be very significant. We are advancing business case for that going forward. I'll just turn it over to Mike for a minute, and then I'll come back to the timelines.
Sure. So I think that's sort of the overview of where we're at with the 10-year vision and its 3 phases, and sort of zeroing in on sort of the near-term steps in order to advance the vision. As everyone will hopefully recall, during the election, we ran the so-called Cure Congestion campaign that outlined 6 asks of all parties to support essentially advancing the vision, especially the phase 2 plan of the vision. So these asks, and I think Mayor Cote introduced sort of the near-term priorities and pressures that TransLink and the Mayor's Council are facing in order to keep that phase 2 plan on track. I think he outlined those fairly well. The remainder of the agenda, of this agenda item, is really designed to provide you an update on elements of these 6 asks that are either the most timely or we have substantive updates. But these asks that we made during the election of all parties remain, essentially our priority to-do list for all parties as a new government forms in the coming weeks.
Moving to the timelines. Doesn't show up very well on all the screens, but so what we intend on doing now, because of drivers, and I'll get into this on the Patello Bridge that Mayor Cote pointed to the urgency on, we are imagining that we are going to be bringing forward 2 investment plans to be able to implement phase 2, probably over the course of about a 6-month span. So that's the green line. It would be the first investment plan that would be around replacing the Patello Bridge, as well as potentially some preliminary work on the Expo Millennium upgrades that are necessary to meet existing over demand relative to supply, and set us up for a good expansion for Broadway and other conditions. So that we would be working on over the course of the summer again. So we're on a very similar timeline to what we are looking at for the phase 1 plan that we worked on with you last year. We would be proposing using a similar structure whereby we are drawing upon the Funding Strategy Committee of the mayors and the board subset to work through on all the key assumptions for this, what the scope of it would be, what the updates to all of our financials. As you're aware, it's not just actually adding something to the investment plan. We have to go through and look at what all our revenue projections are, what all our cost structure is, et cetera, to thus be able to build the new investment plan. We would then bring forward probably in late August a draft for consultation, whereby we would start going out to the public and using online channels to get input on that, especially given it would be the Patello Bridge is the primary piece in that. That would be looking to augment some of the additional consultation that the project is doing on that process. Then we would be looking for approval of that by October to stay on timelines, which I'll get into. Concurrently, we are working on the investment plan, understanding what the nature and the size of the regional funding gap that would be required or that exists right now to be able to implement the rest of phase 2 that I described previously. One of the key pieces is to produce the final business plans for the 2 rapid transit projects that are in phase 2, to put those forward into the Treasury Board for final decisions by the provincial government on the exact amount of their funding and commitments for that, building on the federal funding. So those projects are on similar timelines, both Surrey, Newton, Guildford, and Broadway Extension, whereby we're working over the course of the summer to finalize those business cases and get them in there, so that this region is well positioned to be establishing a new funding agreement with the federal government through the province for phase 2, and sort of be at the front of the line for the next phase of PTIF funding, which we see as being crucial to this. I should say, sorry, so we're anticipating that that new plan would come out in the first quarter of 2018, so we would be doing consultation on that as well. So on the Patello Bridge, I think you're very aware of this, but it's worth always kind of being clear about what the status of the bridge is. It's increasingly become a critical crossing. It's over 80,000 crossings a day, about 10% of that, so about 8,000 of those are trucks, and a good portion of that are gateway even oriented trucks because of where this sits in the region and the key role that it plays. It is well past its design life, 30 years well past. We've been doing a significant amount of work to the degree that we can to keep it in good operations and in safe condition. We put $55 million into it over the last couple of years, really working on the deck deterioration and some other urgent repairs. The seismic work, we're have decided that it doesn't make sense to do major seismic work on this bridge. We need to replace it. So we need to bring forward an investment plan basically this fall in order to avoid a potential closure of the bridge before we have a new bridge in place. So the work that we've done on the bridge, we think, can basically buy another 6 years of life out of that bridge, so take us through 2022, and at which time we would have a new bridge in place. So this is extremely critical. This is just the timeline that we're working on. I mentioned in the previous frame, what we are really working on now with the provincial government is finalizing the exact scope, what the connections will be, what the costing, what the staging will be, and what the nature of their contribution is to this. They've committed 1/3, but getting exactly what that cost would be. And we need that guidance in order to be able to finalize what our procurement methodology would be, et cetera, to go into the business case and be ready to put that into an investment plan in front of you, and then go to an RFQ late this year and an RFP early in 2018. It would be about a 4-year construction period, and that would allow us to open up early in 2023 if everything goes well. So that's the key piece. We are right. We've eaten up any of the room that we had, timing space over the course of the last year or so as we develop the project and as we negotiate with the provincial government on this. So we are definitely into critical times on this. There are a number of areas of uncertainty that we are working on that need to be finalized. Building on Mayor Cote's point, with the provincial government, we need to finalize exactly what that 1/3 capital contribution will be, so against the exact scope. We need to do so probably over the course of the next month to 6 weeks, so that will be a really critical piece of negotiation with the new government, is to go through and agree upon exactly what we're building and how we're going to build it. We'll need final agreement after their processes with Treasury Board, et cetera, to sync up by the time we do that investment plan in the fall. So by September, October, when you're considering investment plan, we'll need to have that certainty in place. We are trying to work with the federal government on potential funding to supplement or augment some of the provincial funding that's on the table. There are specific interests related to goods movement, as I mentioned, because of the role the bridge plays, and connecting to South Fraser Perimeter Road, that corridor. So we have been having discussions with the Canadian Infrastructure Bank, which is not formally up and running yet, but trying to understand what role that might play in facilitating this project and making additional future projects easier to fund and finance. We are also working with Transport Canada on their new fund, this Trade and Transport Corridor Initiative, which had identified $2.1 billion over the course of the next 10 years for projects such as this that are really about goods movement in gateways. So we are going to be working on that. There are some timing issues to that because both of those projects, both of those programs received further definition in the budget, but they're not up and running yet, and they're going to be coming close to where our deadlines would need to be. So those conversations are kind of urgent. We continue to work on the basis that this bridge is a tolled or priced facility, so that when we bring forward an investment plan, the current assumption would be it would be tolled at similar rates to Port Mann Bridge and Golden Ears Bridge to avoid the distortion that currently takes place where about 15,000 vehicles per day is our estimate are right now going from Port Mann Bridge over to Patello that otherwise, if the pricing was equivalent, would probably be eliminated. We will at the same time be starting to advance what a comprehensive region-wide system might look like. So hopefully by the time this bridge is built, that we have a system that is fairer and more equitable that would replace that, but would provide the funding for the regional share. The direction from both bodies have been to try and advance a solution that does not require subsidy from transit or other programs. That it should be a self-sustaining bridge with the support of senior government funding. So we may have to look due to risk with tolling revenues, et cetera, if a backstop is using our major road network funding over the course of the next few years should we have a deficit at any time. So those are the key pieces that we're working on to bring forward the option. The next piece I want to do as we build the investment plan is just a quick update on where the other key components. So we're talking about adding, maybe an additional $70 to $100 million in expenditures, but on top of a $1.5 to $1.6 billion operation. So small sways in whether it be interest rates and other elements can have a huge implication on what our finances are and what we're able to accommodate and what our starting point is. So we've been looking primarily at the two revenue streams that vary the most due to both things that we do, endogenous factors, and exogenous, such as GDP and other things. So fuel tax revenue forecasts are one. They are actually fairly flat. They've been very similar to what we were forecasting, up just moderately, but we think they're on the trends of what we were previously projecting, which it should be noted is flat as a region-wide, so it is not keeping pace with population or GDP, which could be a good thing. As vehicles get more efficient, then the amount of fuel sales in the region is going down. A lower Canadian dollar last year had us have higher fuel tax revenues, but we'd already assumed that in our forecasts. Ridership, we had noted through the end of last year was up 4.5% and was up over 5% the first quarter of this year, so that is favorable. We're anticipating that will probably continue this year. We'll have a higher starting point. We're not projecting, though, that the rate of growth beyond that over the next 3 years would increase, just the starting point would increase. We've also had sort of higher fare revenue just because of the mixture of what people buy in terms of passes and BC Gov passes, et cetera, on that. So we'll be monitoring those closely, but I think it's a good story as we look to what the regional gap will be that we're in. We believe right now, if we were to build a plan today, that TransLink's base finances would make that regional gap a little bit smaller than it otherwise would have been. So that's a great position to be in. One of the other pieces that I mentioned that we're working on both for the Phase 2 plan that might show up in the fall plan, key pieces in the fall plan, but the most of it in Phase 2 is around the upgrades to Expo Millennium line project. This is roughly about a $900 million project. We think of that as the fourth major project. We talk about expansion south of the Fraser, Broadway extension, Patello, but this one is a very significant one. We're looking at having to grow the capacity, so adding additional fleet, probably on the order of about a 25% more increase in capacity on the existing routes. That's just to keep up with background growth. We're actually behind that. The success of Evergreen extension has brought that into stark relief that we are overcrowded, especially on the link between Commercial Broadway and downtown. We are continuing to work with our partners to see if there's a way to advance some acceleration of fleet in advance of a larger project. So we'll be getting back to you in coming months on that. But there's upgrades to the rest of our stations that are necessary, to the power systems, to the maintenance, et cetera, that both to maintain the existing system, which is not sexy, but is essential, but also if we're to do any extensions to the rapid transit network, that's going to place an additional burden on this, as well as the 25% increase in bus service, which just funnels more people into the train system. So we need to advance that. It's a critical piece. Mayor Cote mentioned the unfinished business of the development fee. So the Phase 1 plan relied on a new development cost charge being developed, designed, and enabled probably this year and into early 2018 that could be put in place by 2020. And it would start generating on the order of 15 to 20 million. So that would generate, I think we were counting on about $130 million in revenue for that Phase 1 investment plan, roughly about a quarter of the sort of regional increase in operating and capital expenditures. So the investment plan noted what investments wouldn't take place if that wasn't yet enacted by the end of this year. So some of the growth in 2019, the bus services, MRN, cycling and walking, would have to potentially be deferred if we don't have that in place. So it's really critical that that's done. I'm happy to say we've started the process by which we'd be ready to ask the provincial government to make the legislative changes that are necessary. There's both policy direction that we'll require from both bodies here on what the design of this looks like. So we're working on what the options are, both with the development sector, working with a municipal working group that met this week, representing most of the municipalities with the majority of growth in the region, how this might be designed, how it might be administered to be as efficient as possible. On the left-hand column, you see the things that we need from the provincial government. We obviously need their involvement in this process, telling us what they'd like to see the process look like, what kind of consultations necessary both within the region and with UBCM and others in order for them to make the legislative changes. But we also need, by this fall, that they make a commitment to putting forward that legislation so that we can be on the right course and know that we don't need to be pulling things out. We would then need to draft the framework to a significant enough degree that we know what the legislative requirements that are necessary to enable that would be. We need to do that by this fall and bring it forward to you for direction. The implementation design probably would be completed in Q1 or Q2 of 2018, but we need to hit that sort of September, October on what the necessary changes are so we can get it into legislation. So those are the key elements, Chair. Open it up for questions.
Okay, thank you for a very comprehensive update. And we'll go to questions around the table. Bill first.
Thank you, Jeff, for that very clear update. I have two very quick questions. The first on investment plans. I'm just want to understand the process a little better. Is each plan that's going to come along a separate standalone plan, or does it replace the existing plan, in which case I guess there can be tweaking of the existing plan in the context of the new one?
It's a good question. It actually, Director Holmes, it actually replaces the previous plan. So we would have to be updating all of our base revenues, showing all the investments that we make, not just the incremental ones that we're doing. So to add Patello Bridge, it would also show the 5.1 million hours of bus service, et cetera. The whole plan would be redone, as well as what the forecasts are for all of our revenue sources, costs, debt service, capital program, et cetera. We would also reflect any changes in our capital program based on our new understanding a year later, when it would happen, what the costing is, et cetera.
Thank you. My second question, what is the advantage of obtaining financing from the Canadian Infrastructure Bank for the Patello Bridge over other financing?
I wish I knew. Sorry, we're trying to figure that out. I'd say it's too early. One of the objectives, stated objectives of the bank, is to be able to make it, by crowding in private equity and favorable conditions, not necessarily making cheaper borrowing, but maybe more financing available, and diversifying our ability to go out and find different debt sources, that we're able to build more projects than otherwise would have happened. So we're trying to make that pragmatic and understand how that might work. It could be drawing upon the federal government's vast resources to be able to back some of the risk, whether it be around toll revenues or things like that. That's what we're looking at right now.
Okay, anything? Lois, Mayor Jackson.
I'm not sure whether this may be appropriate for this time, but it has come up relative to the funding of these big projects, and I'm not sure that we shouldn't be receiving some updated report, a collective report between our two groups, giving the Mayor's Council some guidance and advice, as well as the board, relative to some of the comments that were made during this last election. Whether or not they will come to fruition, I don't know. But in looking at moving forward, particularly with the Patello Bridge, and counting on tolls to construct and maintain and so on, I really think it's very, very important that we have a report that comes forward with some commentary, some analysis, and some recommendations from both staff of the Mayor's Council and from TransLink. And I'm not sure if it's an appropriate time, chairs, to put that forward, but I would hope that you could be thinking about that as we move along to approval of this document today. Thank you.
Yeah.
We can do that. We can take that as an action item, and I mean, certainly a timely. By the next meeting, we'll know. We think we'll know who the government is, and with that, we can bring back a report on what that scenario means on tolling revenue.
I think it's really, really important that we don't lose track of this, because we're going along with these assumptions all this time, and perhaps the assumptions are now not correct. And I think those have to be addressed, and I think the staff are probably better positioned to look at the outcome if those funds are not available through tolls one way or another. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor Jackson. Mayor Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, just with respect to the DCC thing, I'm looking at the timetable there, and I noticed that it provides a 1-year advance notice of development fee to provide municipalities the opportunity to implement the DCC, which seems to be pretty generous. But that comment, along with the notion that once you put the bylaw in, doesn't mean you're going to get the money right away. All it does is just says, okay, guys, here's the new hurdle that you have to jump over, and they don't actually pay it mostly until they get their building permits. So you're looking at, because a project doesn't have to pay it if it's already got the approval, the zoning, already got the zoning, it doesn't affect it. So something that comes through that goes for rezoning then is in the queue for paying it. So there could be a lag time of like 2 years perhaps, or more, depending on what the developers do. If it's a significant enough amount of money, they may jump the queue. They might get their approvals early and then just sit on the project for years until the time is right. So it's not going to be, okay, 2020, boy, the money just starts flowing in. That's not going to happen. It's going to be something else other than that. So we should not assume that just because the bylaw is in, that money is going to start coming in. It's not that may not be the case. And again, it depends on the market conditions and what the developer and the development community is thinking about the market conditions. Is it worth building at this time, or is it worth holding off? So there's a lot of ifs and ands and buts in there. So it's not a, it doesn't open the floodgates. That's my main point here.
Those are good points, Mayor Baldwin. We are considering, there's uncertainty obviously in development, so over time, reasonably solid, but there'll be fluctuations, and we need to build that into the way we are both projecting and counting on those revenues to be able to spend them. We're also assuming that there is a ramp-up period and some time there. Because it's at least contemplated right now to be a development cost charge as opposed to a community amenity, I think it would start on all new development that came forward after the bylaws were accepted. But we did want to, based on our consultation both with municipal staff as best practice and working with the development sector, of giving at least a year's notice so they know that those pro formas that they're working on, that they're going to be able to build that in and understand it, then they'll appreciate that.
Okay, seeing no more questions, I'll ask for a motion to receive the report of the funding strategy investment plan committees. Mayor and Mayor Hepner will second. Any discussion? All those in favor of receipt? Any opposed? That carries. So thanks very much for that, Jeff. And we're on to the last item on the agenda. That's the framework for joint meetings. And I'll ask our CEO, Kevin Desmond, who's working on this with Mike Buda, to give us the update on this front.
Thank you, Mayor Robertson. So before you is a brief memo and an attachment. The attachment shows the responsibilities that the Mayor's Council was given as a result of 2014 legislation for the responsibilities of the Mayor's Council on various different elements of TransLink functions, planning, funding, executive compensation, and the like. Over the last year, these two bodies, the Mayor's and the TransLink Board, have been working closely together in a variety of different forums. Several of these meetings of the joint full bodies, as well as a couple of committees, most importantly the Funding Strategy Committee, or it's really been two sort of separate committees working together. That group had been chaired by Mayor Cote, has been working for a better part of a year now, I believe. It's when the group was stood up and did tremendous work to get us to ultimately the approval of the Phase 1 plan by a joint meeting of the mayors and the board. In this document, we are suggesting and just looking for feedback today, and based on today's feedback, then bring it back to the body to formalize. A couple of things. One, to create a joint transportation planning and funding committee, essentially the body that already exists, but to more formalize that as a single body of the two entities, and to further suggest on a semi-annual regular basis that the Mayor's Council and the Board meet to confer on significant issues, perhaps in the spring and fall of each year.
It's page 2 in your public agenda.
Page 2. It's a memo from myself and Mike, framework for joint TransLink Board and Mayor's Council's meeting. I'm sorry. Does everybody have it? Mm-hmm. So I think we're just putting it on the table today to get any feedback, and then we can take that back and then take it from there and hopefully formalize an approach. Again, from my perspective as a sort of a newcomer to the relationship with the board and the mayors, I've seen really good working relationship. And I really do believe that had a lot to do with ultimately the very successful outcome in November of last year on Phase 1, and what I think we all collectively hope will be a similar, very positive outcome, we hope later this year or perhaps early next year with Phase 2 funding plan. So, Mr. Chair, that's the suggestion, the proposal from Mike and I.
Okay, thanks very much, Kevin. Any feedback right off the top here on the document and Kevin's report? Look, Mayor Jackson.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is a really good idea. I just would have mentioned for your consideration that updating of the planning document every 5 years may be too long. So often we have a community in Surrey, for instance, they've got lots of things going on out there, and I know that a period of 5 years could make a huge difference in some of the areas that may be needing either service or expanded service or whatever the case, but that some leeway be there, that at the beginning of every year we have a cursory look and a review or something. I'm not saying a full blown planning exercise, but just to make sure that any of the new areas that have developed, maybe it's an industrial area, for instance, aren't lost in the shuffle because it would take 5 years to really encompass a need for a particular area. Thank you.
Jeff, do you want to respond to that?
It's a good point, Mayor Jackson. We need to actually define this a little bit better. The long-term strategy is the actual regional long-term strategy that's defined. So it's the 30-year one that looks at all our multimodal aspects, as opposed to the area transport plans, what we're doing in the Southwest Area Transport Plan with you in Richmond and Swassem First Nation right now, which we have to think about what the cycle is for refreshing those. But this legislative one has to be done every 5 years.
Okay, any other feedback around the table? So that means we should have a motion to receive the report. Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor of receipt? Any opposed? That carries. And that is all of our business for today's public meetings. So we need a motion to adjourn. Moved and seconded. All those in favor of adjournment? Any opposed? That carries. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
So you gave Neil Robertson the easy task today. You got contacts.